The blow that dropped Corporal Halden Vale to one knee in front of 400 people was clean, fast, and everyone in the forecourt agreed afterward, completely undeserved by the man who threw it. I was standing 8 feet to Halden's left when it landed, close enough to hear the little grunt of air punched out of him, close enough to see the strap of his bearskin dig a white line into his jaw as his head snapped sideways. And I did what every one of us on the wall did in that half-second. Nothing. We stood our posts. That is the first cruelty of what we are. The discipline that makes us worth watching is the same discipline that pins us in place while a stranger knocks one of our own to the stones. My name is Tomas Reck, and I have served the King's Ceremonial Company for 11 years. I have stood the long gate in sleet that froze the medals to my chest. I have marched the coffin of a general I loved past a crowd that could not stop weeping. I have been spat at, filmed, mocked, and once memorably, had a bag of chips emptied over my bearskin by a laughing man who thought the joke of a lifetime was making a statue break. None of that prepared me for the afternoon. A celebrated martial artist named Dorian Kessler walked into the west forecourt of the palace at Harrogate, called out one of my brothers by name, and with the whole watching world raising its phones, appeared to take him apart. I say appeared because I was there for all of it. And the thing about that afternoon, the thing the clips never got right, is that the moment Halden Vale went down was not the end of the story. It was the exact center of it. Everything before was the setup. Everything after was the reason I will tell this until I am too old to speak. Let me start where it started. The company had agreed, reluctantly, over the objection of 2 senior officers, to a public exhibition. Every spring the palace opens the west forecourt for the Festival of the Realm, and the crowds come in their thousands to watch the changing of the guard, the massed band, the ceremonial drill. That year the master of the household, a careful man named Sir Edmund Crane, had approved a new attraction, a demonstration of martial disciplines old and new, a friendly showcase meant to draw the young. A stage of raked sand had been laid at the forecourt's center, ringed by rope and gilded stanchions. On one side stood the exhibition's headliner, Dorian Kessler, 3-time champion of the open circuit, a man whose face sold out arenas and whose highlight reels had been watched more times than there were people in the kingdom. On the other side, at the master's request, stood a single representative of the king's guard. To honor the old disciplines, the program said. To show, the program said, that ceremony was not the same as softness. I want to set the scene properly because the setup is the whole of it, and if you do not understand how carefully the trap was built, you will not understand how completely it sprang. The Festival of the Realm is the one day each year the palace at Harrogate belongs, a little, to the ordinary people of the kingdom. The great forecourt fills. Families come from the far counties. There are stalls of sweets and pennants, and the massed band plays the old marches, and the little ones sit on their father's shoulders to watch the guard change. It is a day of harmless spectacle, and it is beloved, and it is exactly the kind of day into which no one Imagine's cruelty could walk. That is why what Kessler did landed the way it did. He did not mock a soldier on a battlefield. He mocked a guardsman at a festival, in front of the children the festival was for, and some part of the crowd, the better part, felt the wrongness of that before their minds caught up to it. The company had not wanted to send anyone. Colonel Aldous Thorne, our commanding officer, a silver-haired man who had forgotten more about soldiering than most armies ever learn, had argued against it for a week. "We are not performers," he told the master. "We are not a circus act to be matched against a prizefighter." But the master had the king's interest at heart, and the king wished the festival to shine, and so in the end the order came down. The company would provide 1 guardsman to stand in the ring against Dorian Kessler for a demonstration of controlled technique. No striking to harm, no contest of victory, a showcase. That was the theory. The colonel chose Halden Vale. I remember thinking it a strange choice, and I was not alone. Halden was 38, older than most of us who still stood the wall, quiet even by the standards of men trained to silence. He had a plain, weathered face and a way of moving that gave nothing away, economical, unhurried, the walk of a man who had learned long ago never to waste emotion. He was not the tallest of us, nor the broadest. If you had lined up the company and asked a stranger to pick the one who would step into a ring with a champion fighter, Halden Vale would have been near the bottom of the list. He kept to himself. He had transferred into the ceremonial company 6 years earlier from somewhere the paperwork was vague about, and in 6 years I had never once heard him raise his voice or seen him lose his composure. He drank tea, not ale. He read, which set him apart, and he had a scar, faint and old, that ran from the corner of his left eye down into his collar, the kind of mark a man does not get standing a gait. When the colonel read out the assignment on the morning of the exhibition, Halden received it the way he received everything, a small nod, no expression, no question. But I saw the colonel look at him afterward, a long look, the kind that passes between two men who share a thing the rest of us do not. And I saw Halden return it. That look stayed with me. I did not understand it yet. Dorian Kessler arrived at 11 with an entourage. That is the only word for it. An entourage. 2 managers, a trainer, a photographer, a young woman with a clipboard who spoke to no one below a certain rank, and a small mountain of luggage bearing his own likeness. He came out onto the forecourt in a tracksuit the color of a warning sign, and the crowd, which had been placid enough for the band, came alive. Phones went up like a field of steel. He raised both arms and turned a slow circle, drinking it, and the noise rolled off the palace stone and washed back over all of us on the wall. I disliked him within the first minute, and I try to be fair, so let me be fair. He was not a stupid man. You do not become a 3-time champion by being stupid. The body may do the work, but the mind aims it, and Kessler's mind was sharp, quick, hungry. He read a room the way a good soldier reads a field. And he had, I will grant him, a kind of animal magnificence. The way he moved was a pleasure to watch even for a man who wanted to dislike him, a fluid economy of power that made the ordinary act of walking across sand look like a threat and a promise at once. But there was a rot at the center of it, the rot that money and adoration will grow in a man if nothing in his life ever tells him no. He had come to be worshipped, and when he saw what he was to be matched against, a middle-aged guardsman in a red tunic and a tall fur hat, standing motionless at the edge of the ring, I watched the calculation cross his face, and I watched him decide that worship was not enough. He wanted a trophy. "This is the champion of your old ways," he called loud for the crowd. He walked a slow circle around Halden, who stood at parade rest, rifle grounded, eyes forward, giving him nothing. "This, a hat and a coat," he laughed, and the laugh was designed to be shared, and the crowd, God help them, shared it. "I have fought men who trained their whole lives to hurt other men. I have broken champions, and they bring me a statue." He reached out and flicked the brass button on Halden's chest with a fingernail. Tink. "Does it talk? Does the statue talk?" There was a small girl near the front of the rope line. I would learn her name later because of what she did. But at that moment she was only a child in a yellow coat, perhaps 7 years old, holding her father's hand and watching the loud man circle the still one with the plain, unclouded attention that children give things adults have taught themselves to look away from. And when Kessler flicked the brass button and asked whether the statue talked, she said, not loudly, but in one of those gaps that open in any crowd, "That's not nice." Just that, "That's not nice." Her father shushed her, embarrassed. But the words carried the way a child's words will, and I saw a ripple of discomfort move through the nearer part of the crowd. A few adults who had been laughing along with the champion suddenly reminded, by a girl in a yellow coat, of exactly what they were laughing at. Kessler heard it too. He glanced at her, and for the briefest instant something almost like awareness crossed his face. And then he chose the applause over the child, as men like him always do, and turned back to Halden with a bigger laugh, playing to the half of the crowd that was still with him. But the girl had planted something. And I have often thought since, that she was the first person in that whole forecourt to understand what was really happening, and that she understood it because she was too young to have learned to be impressed by the wrong things. Halden did not move. Not the eyes, not the jaw, not a finger. And the not moving, I want you to understand, was not fear and was not weakness. I had stood beside Halden Vale for 6 years, and I knew the difference between a man frozen and a man choosing. He was choosing. He stood inside Kessler's contempt the way a stone stands inside a river, and the river broke around him, and the crowd began, this is the thing. This is the thing the clips could not capture. The crowd began, some of them, to feel it. To feel the wrongness of the loud man circling the quiet one. Not all of them, but some. Sir Edmund Crane hurried out from the shade of the colonnade, distressed, and had a low, urgent word with Kessler's people. This was to be a demonstration, he said, controlled, friendly, a showcase of disciplines. There would be no striking to harm. It had been agreed, it had been signed. Kessler's manager smiled the smile of a man who has read the contract more carefully than the other party, and murmured that of course, controlled technique, absolutely. And the champion himself, standing behind his manager's shoulder, looked at Halden Vale over all their heads with the flat, measuring eyes of a hunter who has already decided that the agreement is a formality. The colonel came to the ropes. I saw him leaning close to Halden and say something, 3 or 4 words, no more. Halden's answer was smaller still, a single dip of the chin. Whatever passed between them, it was not instruction. It looked, if I had to name it, like permission, or perhaps its opposite, a restraint laid on, a leash tightened. I did not know which. I would not know for another hour. Then the master raised his hand. The band fell silent, and a herald announced to 400 people and 100 cameras that the King's Guard, in the person of Corporal Halden Vale, would join Master Dorian Kessler in a demonstration of controlled martial technique, in the spirit of friendship between the disciplines old and new. Halden handed his rifle to me. That is a thing that has to be understood for those who do not know us. A guardsman does not simply hand off his weapon. There is a form to it, a ritual older than any of us, and Halden performed it exactly, the quarter turn, the present, the transfer with both hands, the small bow of the head to the arm as it leaves you. He did it as if the whole thing were a parade and not a humiliation waiting to happen, and I took the rifle and stepped back, and my hands, I confess, were not entirely steady. He unbuckled his bearskin and set it on the stanchion post with the same care. Beneath it, his hair was iron gray and cropped close, and without the great fur hat he looked smaller and older and terribly, terribly ordinary, a tired man in a red coat about to be embarrassed in front of the whole realm. Kessler had stripped to a fighting shirt and was rolling his shoulders, loose, unhurried, a snake uncoiling in the sun. He grinned across the sand. "Try to stay awake, statue," he said. And the demonstration began. For the first minute, it was almost what Sir Edmund had promised. Kessler moved, quick and showy, a flurry of feints, testing. Halden moved too, and here was the first small surprise, though at the time it read as nothing. Halden moved not at all the way the crowd expected. No stance, no raised guard, no theatrical crouch. He simply turned, always turned, keeping himself square to the champion, his weight low and quiet, his hands loose at his sides. Where Kessler was noise, Halden was economy. Kessler threw a fast combination that stopped a hand's breadth from Halden's face, showing off, showing the crowd how close he could come, and Halden did not flinch, did not blink, only shifted a half step and was, somehow, no longer quite where the champion's fists had aimed. It happened 3 times. Each time the crowd gasped at Kessler's speed, and did not quite notice that the speed had touched nothing. I noticed. I had watched Halden Vale move for 6 years, and I had never, not once, seen him move like this. But Kessler noticed too. That was the thing about him, the sharp, hungry mind under the vanity. He noticed that his best flurries were landing on air, that the tired old man in the red coat was not backpedaling in fear but simply, quietly not being hit, and I saw the grin thin on his face and something colder come into his eyes. The showman was giving way to the competitor. And the competitor did not like a puzzle he could not immediately solve in front of a crowd that had come to watch him win. So he stopped playing. The change was fast and ugly, and it caught even me off guard, and I had been braced for it. Kessler dropped the showman's flourishes and came in low and hard and real, a genuine takedown attempt, the kind that ends fights, driving off his back leg with the full weight and speed of a champion who has done this 10,000 times against men trained to stop him. It was not controlled technique. It was a man deciding to win, agreement or no agreement. And it worked. The impact was real. I heard it, a dull, meaty concussion of body against body, and I saw Halden's feet leave their line. And for one horrible suspended instant, the tired old man in the red coat was airborne, driven backward and down by 400 pounds of champion and momentum. He struck the sand on his hip and shoulder. Kessler landed atop him with the practiced weight of a man who ends things on the ground, one forearm across Halden's chest, the other cocked back, and the crowd made a single enormous sound, half gasp and half cheer, and the phones drank it all. Then, because Kessler could not help himself, because the rot at the center of the man needed a picture and not just a win, he did the thing that turned the whole afternoon. He did not simply pin Halden and stand up the victor. He grabbed a fistful of the red tunic at Halden's shoulder, hauled the guardsman's upper body half off the sand, and struck him, an open-handed, contemptuous blow across the face, the blow I had heard from 8 feet away, the slap of a man humiliating a beaten enemy for the cameras. Halden's head snapped sideways. The strap of the bearskin he was no longer wearing had already gone. There was nothing between the champion's hand and my brother's face. And Kessler leaned down over him close and said something I could not hear but which the front rows heard and which spread through the crowd in the next minutes like a stain. He said, "Stay down, statue. That's an order. That's an order." I have thought about those 3 words more than any 3 words I have ever heard, because Dorian Kessler, in the arrogance that had never once in his gilded life been told no, could not have chosen worse. He had put his hand on a king's guardsman in front of the realm, and he had given him an order. Halden Vale went still beneath him, utterly still. And the crowd, seeing the champion crouched in triumph over the motionless man, believed it was over. So did Sir Edmund Crane, who was already striding into the ring with his face gray, calling for it to stop, that this was not the agreement, that this was a disgrace. So did the herald, who fumbled for words. So, I will be honest, did most of the company on the wall. I saw shoulders drop. I saw jaws tighten. I saw 11 years of my brothers absorbing the shame of watching one of our own beaten down and slapped and ordered to stay in the dirt, and unable, by the discipline that defines us, to do a single thing about it. Only 2 men in that whole forecourt were not fooled. One was Colonel Aldous Thorne, who had not moved from the ropes, who was not gray with shame like the master, but was watching with a strange, coiled, almost fearful attention, the look of a man who has lit a fuse and is counting. The other was Halden Vale. I know now what I did not know then, that everything up to that instant had been Halden obeying, not obeying Kessler, obeying the colonel, obeying the order that had come down with the assignment, the order I had seen laid on him at the ropes like a leash, controlled technique, no striking to harm, a demonstration. Halden had stepped into that ring under a restraint far heavier than any hold Kessler could put on him, the restraint of a man told by his commander to absorb, to endure, to give the showcase its show and keep his hands quiet, because the company could not be seen to send a killer against a sportsman at a children's festival. Halden had let the champion flurry at him. Halden had let the champion drive him down, because the leash held, because a king's guardsman obeys. But there is a line in every restraint, and Dorian Kessler had just walked across it. The order signed by Sir Edmund Crane had said no striking to harm. Kessler had struck to harm. The agreement had said friendship between the disciplines. Kessler had spat on it. And a slap to the face of a downed man in front of the realm with the words "stay down," That's an order. That was no longer a demonstration Halden was bound to endure. That was an assault on a king's guardsman on the king's own forecourt. The leash was not merely loosened. It had been cut by the other man's own hand. I saw the change come into Halden's eyes. I had never seen it before, and I have never seen it since, and I hope I never do again. It was not anger. That is what people always expect, and it is always wrong. Anger is hot and loud, and it makes a man clumsy. What came into Halden Vale's eyes as he lay in the sand with the champion's hand still fisted in his tunic was the opposite of anger. It was a great and terrible calm, a lowering of every temperature in him, a settling, the way the air goes still and heavy in the last moment before lightning. His whole face changed without moving a muscle. And I, who had handed him his rifle 100 times and stood beside him in sleet and marched behind him past a general's coffin, I felt the hair rise on my arms, because for the first time in 6 years, I was looking at the man Halden Vale had been before he ever put on the red coat. And I understood, all at once and far too late to warn anybody, that we had all made a terrible mistake about who the ordinary tired man in the tunic actually was. What happened next took, by the timekeeper's count, 4 seconds. Kessler, sensing perhaps some flicker of the thing I had seen, drew back his hand for a second blow to end it, to punctuate it, to make the picture perfect. And Halden moved. I will try to describe it, though I have failed to describe it 100 times to 100 listeners, because the truth is the human eye is not built to keep up with what a master does when the leash comes off. It was not violent, which is the first thing everyone gets wrong. There was no wild swing, no roar, no flurry to match Kessler's flurries. It was quieter than anything the champion had done all afternoon, and it was final. Halden's near hand came up not to strike, to catch, and closed on the wrist of Kessler's cocked arm, just closed on it. And in the same motion his hips turned, that same quiet economical turn I had watched all afternoon and mistaken for nothing. And his other hand found a point on the champion's driving arm, and Halden Vale simply gave Dorian Kessler's own momentum back to him, redirected it, folded it, and the 3-time champion of the open circuit, 400 pounds of trained and hungry power, came up off the pinned man like a wave off a rock and went over, and around and down, onto his back in the sand, and did not get up. He was not hurt. That is the thing I need you to hear, because the clips make it look like something it was not. Kessler was not struck, not stunned, not injured. Halden had not hit him at all. He had taken the champion's own force and used it to reverse their positions with such total, effortless economy that Kessler found himself, in the space of one breath, flat on his back in the sand with a middle-aged guardsman kneeling calm and controlled above him. One hand laid, not gripping, not choking, just laid with an authority that needed no force across the point where the champion's collar met his throat. A hold, a control. The kind of hold that says, without a word, I could end this, and I am choosing not to. The forecourt went so silent, I heard a pigeon's wings. 400 people had come to watch a champion. They had watched him circle and mock and win and slap a beaten man and order him to stay down. And then, between one heartbeat and the next, they had watched the beaten man rise out of the sand like a thing they had no name for and put the champion on his back and hold him there as gently and as terribly as a grown man holds a child who has run into the road. And not one of them understood what they had seen. They only knew, in the way a crowd knows things all at once, that the story had inverted, that the man they had come to worship was pinned and helpless, and the man they had pitied was what? Nobody knew yet. Nobody but the colonel at the ropes, whose gray head had bowed, just slightly, the bow of a man watching something he had hoped never to see again, do exactly what he had always known it could do. Halden held Dorian Kessler down for perhaps 3 seconds. He said nothing. His face had already gone back to the plain, weathered, unreadable mask I knew. And then, with the same care he had used to hand me his rifle, he took his hand from the champion's throat, rose, stepped back one clean pace, and stood not in triumph, not in a fighter's stance, but at parade rest, hands loose, eyes forward, a king's guardsman again, and waited to see what the man on the ground would do. What the man on the ground did was scramble up, wild-eyed, humiliated, and reach for the thing that men like Dorian Kessler always reach for when the world stops obeying them. He reached for a lie. He cheated, Kessler said. He said it loud, and he said it to the cameras, because the cameras were the only judge Dorian Kessler had ever truly answered to. He was on his feet now, brushing sand from his shirt with hands that shook just slightly, and he had already found the shape of the story he needed. That's not fighting, that's a trick hold. He waited, he let me carry him, he set it up. That's not skill, that's cheating. This was supposed to be a demonstration, and he assaults me. He spun to the crowd, arms wide, the aggrieved showman. You all saw it. He grabbed me. This is a setup. This whole thing is a setup to make me look bad. And here is the ugly truth about crowds, the truth I have learned standing before them for 11 years. A crowd wants to have been right. 400 people had spent an hour cheering Dorian Kessler. They had come to worship him, to accept what they had just seen with their own eyes, that their champion had been put down as easily as a man sets down a bag of shopping, meant accepting that they had been wrong to worship, that the tired, quiet man was the one who deserved it. That is a hard thing for a crowd to swallow all at once. So Kessler's lie found soft ground. I heard the murmur change. I heard the sympathy that had begun, minutes ago, to flow toward Halden falter and split. Some of them had felt the wrongness of the mockery. But now the champion, their champion, was crying foul, and a good half of the forecourt wanted to believe him, because believing him let them keep the afternoon they had paid for. A rematch, Kessler said, seizing it, feeding it. Right now, no tricks, real fighting. Let's see the statue do that again when I'm ready for it. He rounded on Sir Edmund Crane, who stood frozen and appalled at the ring's edge. This is your palace. You owe me a fair bout after that ambush. Or is your famous guard afraid to fight a man who's looking at him? I watched Sir Edmund's face, and I saw a careful man's careful world coming apart. He had approved a friendly showcase. He had a champion demanding a real fight in a crowd half-turned, and 100 cameras running, and a king somewhere in the palace behind him who would within the hour see all of it. His instinct, the right instinct, was to end it, to call the whole thing off, to have Kessler and his entourage escorted from the forecourt, and to close ranks around the guardsman who had done nothing wrong. He opened his mouth to do exactly that. And Halden Vale spoke. It was the first word he had said since he handed me his rifle, and it stopped Sir Edmund cold, and it stopped the crowd, because a king's guardsman speaking at his post is rarer than snow in summer. Halden did not raise his voice. He did not look at Kessler. He looked at Sir Edmund Crane, and he said, quietly, evenly, "Let him have his rematch, sir." You could have heard a coin drop on the far side of the forecourt. Sir Edmund stared at him. "Corporal, I don't think." "He has called me a cheat before the realm," Halden said, in that same level voice, a voice with no heat in it at all. "The company has been called afraid. Words said before 400 people and 100 cameras will not be unsaid by walking away, sir. They will only be unsaid one way." He paused. "With respect, sir, let him have his rematch, and this time let there be no rule about it." The colonel at the ropes closed his eyes. Because that last line was Halden Vale asking, in the only language a guardsman is permitted, for the leash to come off entirely. No striking to harm had been the restraint. Halden had honored it right up until Kessler cut it. Now the champion was demanding a real bout, a fair bout, no tricks, and Halden was standing in front of the master of the household and saying, in effect, "Very well, give him what he asks for. Give him a real bout with a real king's guardsman, and let us all discover together what that means." I do not think Sir Edmund understood the weight of what he was agreeing to. I do not think 390 of the 400 did, but the colonel understood, and I understood. And when Sir Edmund, cornered by the cameras and the champion and the guardsman's own request, gave a small helpless nod and said, "Very well, a second bout, under proper supervision. And then this ends, whatever the outcome. I felt something cold move down my spine, and I gripped Halden's rifle a little tighter, and I found myself doing a thing I had not done in a long time. I prayed. Not for my brother. My brother did not need it. I prayed, God forgive me for the champion. They cleared the ring. Kessler's trainer worked his shoulders and murmured into his ear, and the champion nodded, jaw set, the humiliation curdling in him into something meaner and more focused. He was a professional. Whatever had happened in that first exchange, he had felt it now, felt the truth of it in his own body, the way you can feel a river's real strength only once you are actually in it, and the professional in him had stopped underestimating. That, in its way, made him more dangerous. A vain man who thinks his opponent is beneath him is easy. A vain man who has just been frightened and cannot admit it, who is now fighting to erase a humiliation in front of the world, will pour everything he has into the next exchange. Kessler intended, I have no doubt, to genuinely hurt Halden Vale in the second bout, not to demonstrate, to damage, to take back the afternoon with blood. Halden, for his part, did nothing. He stood at parade rest at the ring's edge and waited, still and gray and ordinary, and I brought him a flask of water which he took with a nod and did not drink, and I said low under the noise of the crowd, Halden, what am I watching? Who are you? He looked at me for a moment, and then he did a thing he had never done in 6 years. He smiled, a small, tired, rueful smile, the smile of a man remembering something he had worked very hard to forget. An old dog, Tomas, he said, that's all. An old dog. They retired to the front porch. The smile faded. Some men won't let a dog lie on the porch. They have to come up the steps and kick it just to prove they can. He handed the flask back. I asked the colonel for permission once when I transferred in to never do this again. He gave it to me. 6 years I kept it. He looked out at Kessler, rolling his shoulders across the sand. The colonel just gave the permission back. You saw him at the ropes. 3 words. His jaw tightened just slightly. It's your call. That's what he said to me before it started. He knew what that man was. He gave me leave to decide when the time came whether to be the guardsman or the dog. And you chose, I said. He chose for me, Halden said, when he put his hand on my face and gave me an order in front of my king's house. The old, terrible calm was back in his eyes, banked now but not gone. I stood a great many things in my life before I ever stood a gate, Tomas, but not that. No man gives me an order but my colonel and my king. Certainly not a man who breaks his word and calls it sport. The herald called the ring. Halden Vale set the flask down on the stanchion post, squared the red tunic on his shoulders, and walked back onto the sand. I did not know, standing there, the shape of what he was. I would learn it in the hour that followed from the colonel, from a record no one below a certain seal was meant to see, from the way the whole edifice of the palace would move before the sun set, to gather this quiet gray man back into its arms and set him gently, unbreakably, beyond the reach of the loud world that had knocked him down. But I knew this much, watching him walk out to meet the champion the second time, that I had spent 6 years standing beside a man I did not know at all, and that the ordinary red coat had been hiding something the way a scabbard hides a blade. Kessler was waiting for him at the center of the sand, and this time there was no showman's grin, just the flat, hungry, frightened eyes of a man who intended to win at any cost. No tricks this time, statue, he said. No, sir, Halden agreed quietly, no tricks. And the second bout began. I have watched it since, frame by frame, on the clips that the whole kingdom watched. I have paused it and slowed it and studied it, trying to catch the thing that 400 pairs of eyes and 100 cameras could not catch in real time. And I will tell you what I have concluded after all these years. You cannot see it. The eye is not built for it. What Halden Vale did in the second bout is a thing the body only understands after long study, and the crowd that day understood nothing except that the impossible kept happening and would not stop. Kessler came in fast, faster than the first time and cleaner. All the show burned off him. a champion fighting for his life now and not for a picture. He led with a feint and drove a real strike behind it, the kind of combination that had ended proper fighters in proper arenas, and it was beautiful and it was fast and it found nothing but air, because Halden was no longer standing where the strike arrived. Kessler adjusted mid-flight, a professional, a genuine talent, I will never take that from him, and turned the miss into a grapple, lunging to close the distance and smother the old man before he could move again. And that, too, found nothing, because Halden let him close and turned inside the grapple, and Kessler's own arms closed on empty red wool as the guardsman flowed out the side of the hold like water out of a cracked cup. That was the pattern, that was the whole of it. Kessler attacked with everything a lifetime of training had given him, and Halden Vale was never, ever there. He did not block, blocking is meeting force with force, and Halden met nothing. He did not counterstrike, not once in that whole second bout. His hand stayed low and quiet and open. He simply refused over and over to be where the champion's power arrived, and each time Kessler's committed weight sailed past the point it had aimed at, Halden gave it the smallest possible nudge, a touch at the elbow, a shift of hip against hip, a hand laid on a shoulder that turned the champion's momentum against his own balance and sent him staggering or turning or down. Not thrown, not struck, undone. Kessler was defeating himself against a man who would not resist him, and the harder he threw himself into it, the worse it was, because every ounce of force he committed was an ounce Halden borrowed and gave back. 3 times in 90 seconds Dorian Kessler ended up on the sand. Not once did Halden Vale hit him. Not once did the guardsman's face change from its plain gray calm. And by the 3rd time, the crowd had stopped cheering for the champion, because you cannot cheer a thing you have begun to fear, and what 400 people were watching had crossed over from a bout into something that felt almost like witnessing a law of nature, as though they had watched a man try to punch the tide, and the tide simply keep being the tide. Kessler rose from the 3rd fall slower than the others. His shirt was soaked, his chest heaving, and something had gone out of his eyes, not the meanness would be the last thing to go, but the belief. The animal certainty that had carried him through arenas and highlight reels and a gilded worshipped life had met something it could not push through, and I watched the champion of the open circuit stand in the sand of the West forecourt and understand, for the first time in his adult life, that he was outmatched, not outstrengthed, not outsped. Outmatched, beaten by something that had nothing to do with any of the qualities he had spent his life perfecting, beaten by a kind of skill so far beyond his own that it made his strength and speed into liabilities, tools that the quiet man simply picked up and used against him. And that understanding did to Dorian Kessler what it does to a certain kind of man. It broke something. And what came out of the break was not grace, and was not humility, and was not the good sportsman's rueful nod. What came out was rage. Naked, humiliated, cornered rage. The rage of a spoiled and adored man who has just discovered, in front of the entire realm, the existence of a thing his money and his fame and his fists cannot buy or beat or bully. And a man in that state does a dangerous thing. He stopped fighting to win, and he started fighting to hurt. I saw it coming. I think the colonel saw it coming. Kessler came in the 4th time not with technique but with a wild, committed, brutal intent, abandoning all form, throwing his whole body at the guardsman like a man trying to break a door. And his hand, I saw this, I was watching for it, his hand went not to grapple but to strike at the throat, an illegal, dangerous, deliberately damaging blow that had no place in any sanctioned bout, and every place in the heart of a man who had decided that if he could not win, he would at least make the quiet man bleed. And Halden Vale, for the first and only time in the whole affair, struck back. I want to be precise about this, because the clips are not, and because the precision is the entire point of what Halden Vale was. He did not strike Kessler in return. He did not answer the throat strike with a throat strike. What he did, in a motion so fast and so small that the cameras caught only a blur, and the crowd caught only the result, was intercept. His open hand met the inside of Kessler's driving forearm and turned it, just turned it, the way you might turn a key, and the champion's own committed weight did the rest. His arm folded, his balance broke, his legs came out from under him, and Dorian Kessler went down onto his back in the sand for the fourth and final time, hard, all the air driven out of him, and Halden Vale followed him down and pinned him, one knee across the champion's chest, both of Kessler's wrists gathered and controlled in one of the guardsman's weathered hands, held there against the sand as easily and as immovably as if the three-time champion were a child having a tantrum. And this time Halden did not let him up. He held him, and he leaned down close, the way Kessler had leaned down over him in the first bout, and he said something. The crowd could not hear it, but I was close. I was 8 feet away with the rifle in my hands, and I heard it, and I will carry it to my grave. He said quietly, without any anger at all. You struck at a man's throat in front of children, sir. That is not sport. I have let you fall 4 times without laying a hand on you so that you would understand and be able to walk away and keep your legs and your name. You did not understand, so understand this instead. He held the champion's eyes. I could have ended you at any moment in the last 5 minutes. I did not, because I stopped being that man 6 years ago, and because there are little ones in this crowd, and because you are not worth what it would cost me. Not if you understand me. And Dorian Kessler, pinned, spent, humiliated before the world, with the quiet gray man's knee on his chest and his own wrists useless in one weathered hand, Dorian Kessler nodded. Halden Vale released him, stood, stepped back 1 clean pace and returned to parade rest. The forecourt did not cheer. That is the thing I remember most. 400 people who had come to be entertained stood in a silence so complete and so strange that the pigeons in the colonnade were the loudest thing in it. Because they had understood, finally, all of them, the thing that had been true from the first minute and that the champion's lie had briefly obscured, that they had watched a man of terrible skill choose, over and over, not to use it, that the mercy had been the whole demonstration. That the quiet guardsman could have ended Dorian Kessler at any second and had instead spent 5 minutes letting a raging man fall softly into the sand rather than break him, because there were children watching, and because restraint, not power, was the discipline he served. That is when Sir Edmund Crane, standing at the ring's edge with his careful world in ruins around him, turned and hurried back into the palace, not, as I first thought, in retreat, but to make a telephone call. And that telephone call is the reason the impossible thing, the truly impossible thing, the thing this whole story is named for, had not yet even begun. Because the reversal in the ring was not the impossible part. The impossible part was who Halden Vale turned out to be. Kessler's people got him up and off the sand. He walked out of the ring under his own power, which I was glad of, because it meant Halden had told the truth. The champion was not hurt, only beaten and shamed, his legs and his name intact, exactly as the guardsman had said. But his manager was already on a phone, and his lawyer, who had materialized from the entourage, was already talking loudly about assault and countersuit and reputational damage, and I understood that the loud world was not going to let this go. Men like Kessler do not accept a defeat, they litigate it. They had 100 cameras worth of the first exchange, the flurry, the takedown, the moment their champion had pinned the guardsman, and I could already see the story they would cut from it. Guard attacks star athlete, palace lets it happen, champion humiliated by dirty trick. The truth would be there in the footage too, for anyone who watched to the end. But men like Kessler do not need the crowd to watch to the end. They only need the crowd to have a reason to keep worshipping. And that is where the palace moved. I did not see the machinery of it, most of it, because I was a corporal standing a post, and the machinery of the palace turns above corporals. But I saw the edges, and I heard the rest afterward from the colonel himself, in the long quiet hour after the forecourt was cleared, and I will set it down as I learned it. Sir Edmund Crane's telephone call had gone not to a lawyer but to the colonel, and the colonel's call, "I will come to what was in it," had gone somewhere higher still. Within 20 minutes, while Kessler's people were still working themselves into a lather of grievance at the ring's edge, a second party came out of the palace into the west forecourt. Not guards, not the master, but 2 civil officials in dark coats, and walking a pace behind them, a man I knew by sight though I had never spoken to him. The king's own private secretary, Lord Harroway, a spare, gray, formidable man who did not come out onto forecourts for exhibitions or festivals or anything short of a matter that touched the crown directly. The crowd did not know his face. But the colonel straightened when he saw him, and so did I, because when Lord Harroway walks out of the palace, something has already been decided inside it. He went first to Kessler's people. I could not hear the words, but I could read the shape. The manager's loud grievance faltered. The lawyer's confident jaw came down. Lord Harroway spoke to them for perhaps 90 seconds, evenly, without heat, holding a slim folder that he did not open, and by the end of it the 3 of them, manager, lawyer, champion, had gone very quiet and very still, and Kessler, who a few minutes before had been demanding rematches before the world, was looking at the gray official with the expression of a man who has just been shown a card he did not know was in the deck. Then Lord Harroway came to Halden Vale, and the king's private secretary, in front of what remained of the 400, stopped before my brother the corporal and inclined his head. A bow, small, precise, unmistakable. The kind of bow a senior man of the crown does not give a corporal. The kind of bow he gives an equal, or a superior, or a debt. "Colonel Vale," Lord Harroway said, clearly, for the crowd to hear. "The king sends his regard and asks whether you are hurt." "Colonel Vale." The word went through the forecourt like a current. Colonel, not corporal. And I stood there with the rifle in my hands and the whole afternoon rearranging itself in my head. 6 years of a quiet gray man who read books and drank tea and never raised his voice. And I understood that I had never once, in all that time, known his rank, because he had worn a corporal's tunic and let us all call him Halden, and the truth had been sitting beside me on the wall the whole time, folded up small and hidden, the way he folded everything. Halden Colonel Vale bowed in return, exactly as deep and no deeper. "I am not hurt, my lord. Please convey my thanks to His Majesty." "He watched it," Lord Harroway said. "From the East Gallery, all of it." A pause. "He remembers you, Colonel, from before. He asked me to tell you that." And something moved in Halden Vale's plain gray face, the first true crack I had seen in it in 6 years, quickly mastered, but there. "That is more than I deserve, my lord." "He would disagree," said the private secretary, "and so would a good many men who came home because of you. But that is a conversation for the palace, not the forecourt." He turned then and raised his voice and addressed the crowd and the 100 cameras, and I realized this was the whole purpose of him coming out, that the palace, having decided in 20 minutes what it meant to do, had sent the one man whose word carried the crown's weight to do it in the open, before the story could be cut and twisted. "This exhibition," Lord Harroway said, "was arranged as a friendly demonstration of martial disciplines. It was not honored as such by one party." He did not look at Kessler. He did not need to. "What you have witnessed is a member of the King's Guard exercising, under extreme provocation, a restraint that most men in his position could not have managed and that few of you can imagine. He was struck. He was ordered to stay down. He was called a cheat and a coward before you all. And in answer, he declined 4 separate times to injure a man who was trying very hard to injure him. That is not weakness. That is discipline of a very high order, and it is the least remarkable thing this man has done in the service of this crown." The forecourt was utterly silent. "You will see clips of the first exchange," Lord Harroway went on, "and they will be edited to tell you a lie. So I will tell you the truth once plainly, while you are all still here to hear it, and you may weigh it against whatever you are shown later. This man is Colonel Halden Vale. 6 years ago he asked to lay down a distinguished career and stand a quiet post, and the king granted it, because a man who has given what he has given has earned the right to a quiet post. He has stood it faithfully and asked nothing. Today a man came up the palace steps and struck him for sport, and demanded he prove himself and would not be turned away. So he was answered with mercy in front of your children by a man who could have answered otherwise. Remember that you saw it. Remember which one showed you what a champion is. He inclined his head to Halden Vale a second time, turned, and walked back into the palace, and the two dark-coated officials fell in behind him, and the west forecourt of the palace at Harrogate stood in a silence that no exhibition had ever produced. 400 people and 100 cameras absorbing the fact that the quiet gray man they had pitied, and then feared, was a colonel the king himself rose to remember. I found the colonel, my colonel, Aldous Thorne, at the ropes, and I could not help myself. 11 years of discipline, and I could not keep the question in. "Sir," I said low, "who is he? Who is Halden Vale?" And Colonel Thorne, watching the gray man stand his sudden fame with the same still economy he stood everything, told me. "There was a warrior too young to remember properly, Tomas," he said. "Not a grand one. A dirty, far-off, thankless one, the kind that never gets a monument. The kingdom sent men into it, and most of the kingdom preferred not to know. And in that war there was a small unit, never named, never paraded, the men the crown reaches for when a thing must be done that cannot be done loudly. Halden Vale was the man who made those men, not just a member of that unit, its master, its instructor. The one who taught a generation of the crown's quietest soldiers how to move, how to endure, how to prevail without noise. The disciplines he studied are older than this kingdom, Tomas. He spent years of his youth learning them from teachers half a world away, the arts that a champion like that Kessler has never so much as heard of, arts built not to win crowds but to keep a man and his brothers alive in the dark. He mastered them, and then he taught them, and the men he taught came home who would not otherwise have come home. I looked at the quiet gray man across the forecourt, and I could not make the two pictures fit, the tea-drinking corporal who read books on the wall, and the master of the crown's most secret soldiers. And yet, watching him, I could suddenly see nothing else. He was decorated, the colonel went on. Quietly, of course, men like Vale are never decorated where the cameras are. He holds the Cross of Valor, Tomas, though you'll never see him wear it, for a night I'm not permitted to tell you about, a night that a good many families owe their fathers to. He could have had any command he wanted. Instead, 6 years ago, he came to the king and asked to stop, to lay it all down, to stand a quiet post and be no one and never do it again. The colonel's voice went lower. I asked him why once. He said a man can only reach into the dark so many times before he starts to like it, and that the day he noticed he was starting to like it was the day he decided to stop, while he still could, while there was still a man left in him worth stopping to save. So the king let him fold himself up small and stand agate. And I have kept his secret for 6 years, and never once regretted it, and always dreaded the day some fool would come up the steps and make him unfold. And today a fool came up the steps, I said. Today a fool came up the steps, the colonel agreed. And you saw what he made him do. He was quiet a moment. You saw, too, what Vale did with it. Any other man of his skill, humiliated in front of the realm, would have broken that boy in half and been justified in it. Vale let him fall 4 times without a mark on him, and gave him a chance to walk away with his legs and his pride each time. And only when the boy went for his throat in front of children did he take him down and hold him and tell him the truth. That is the difference between a fighter and a colonel, Tomas. That is the difference between power and discipline. Kessler had the power, Vale had the discipline, and discipline in the end is simply power that has learned to say no to itself. He looked at me. Which is the whole of what we are on this wall? You understand that now better than you did an hour ago. I do. But I have not yet told you the ending, and the ending is where the impossible thing truly comes to rest. So let me go back to the forecourt, where Dorian Kessler's people were still standing, chastened but not yet finished, and where the loud world was preparing, even then, to have its revenge on the quiet one. Because Lord Harroway's words in the open air had done a great deal, the crowd had turned, wholly now, and where an hour before they had cheered the champion, they now looked at him the way a room looks at a man who has been caught in a small, ugly lie. But the crowd was 400 people. The cameras reached millions. And Kessler's manager, a hard, practical man not entirely without cunning, understood that the battle in the forecourt was lost, but the battle in the wider world was only beginning. I heard him as they gathered their champion to leave, muttering the plan. They would say nothing here, they would smile and withdraw, and then they would cut the footage. And by nightfall the story across every screen in the kingdom would be the guard's dirty trick, the palace's cover-up, the humiliated star bravely staying silent. Truth is slow. A lie with good editing is fast. And the manager was betting, as such men always bet, that fast would beat slow. He had not reckoned on the king. The thing about the machinery of the palace that a corporal never sees is how fast it can move when it decides to, and how completely. Lord Harroway had not come out onto the forecourt merely to make a speech. He had come out because the king, watching from the East Gallery, had already made a decision, and the speech was only the visible edge of it. What the king had decided, I learned this too, over the following days, as the whole shape of it became clear, was that a man who had given the crown what Halden Vale had given it would not be handed to the wolves of the loud world to be chewed for sport, not while there was a king to prevent it. So the machinery moved. And here is where the story turns from a bout in the sand into something larger, something that reaches past the forecourt and into the whole watching kingdom, because the king did not fight the lie with a lie. He fought it with the truth, released faster and wider than Kessler's people could cut their footage, and he fought it with something the champion's manager had entirely failed to account for. He fought it with the men Halden Vale had brought home. It began that same evening. Kessler's people were fast, I will grant them. By the time the sun was down, the cut had gone out as promised. 40 seconds of the first exchange, the flurry, the takedown, the champion pinning the guardsman, and then a hard cut, leaving out everything that came after, over a caption that called it an ambush and a disgrace and a palace scandal. It moved the way such things move, fast and hot and certain of itself. And for a few hours that night it looked as though the manager's bet would pay, as though fast would beat slow, as though the loud world would take the afternoon from the quiet man after all. And then the truth came the other way, and it did not come from the palace, and that was the genius of it. The king had not issued a statement. Statements are slow and they smell of defense. What the king had done, quietly through Lord Harroway, was a single small thing. He had lifted, for one night and one purpose only, the seal on a name. Not the deeds, those stayed secret as they must, just the name. He had let it be known, to a handful of men who had served under a certain instructor in a certain unnamed unit, that the man who had trained them, the man some of them had spent years trying to find and thank, was standing agate at Harrowgate under the name Halden Vale, and that tonight, of all nights, he could use their voices. And they came, not to the forecourt that was closed. They came the way men come now, on the same screens where the lie was spreading, one after another, faces I did not know and names that meant nothing to me but everything to each other. A graying man in a mechanic's coveralls, filming himself in a garage, who said only, "I don't know what that clip is trying to tell you. But the man in the red coat is the reason I have both my legs, and the reason 4 of my mates came home to their kids. You want to know who Halden Vale is? He's the best man I ever served under, and he never once raised his voice, and he'd let a fool knock him down 100 times before he'd hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Watch the whole thing, not the cut, the whole thing." And another, an older woman this time, a widow, who said her husband had come home from a war he was not supposed to survive, because his instructor had taught him a thing that kept him alive, and that the instructor's name was Vale, and that she had lit a candle for him every year for 11 years without ever being able to thank him, and here was her thanks at last, out loud. And another and another and another. They did not coordinate it. That is the thing that undid Kessler's manager entirely. You cannot fight 100 separate men who all decided, on the same night of their own will, to speak for a man they loved. It was not a campaign. It was a debt coming due, all at once, from every corner of the kingdom, and it swept the cut footage away the way a tide sweeps away a child's wall of sand. By morning the story had inverted a second time. The clip that had called Halden Vale an ambusher was buried under 1,000 voices calling him the finest man they had ever known, and under the full footage, which the crowd's own phones had captured and which now played everywhere, the whole of it, the mockery, the slap, the order, the 4 merciful falls, the throat strike answered with a hold and not a blow, the quiet words to a raging man, the release. Watched to the end, it told only one story. And the kingdom, finally, watched it to the end. Dorian Kessler's manager understood, that morning, that his bet had failed. But it was already too late for understanding, because the loud world that had lifted the champion up turned on him with all the speed and cruelty it reserves for a fallen idol. The arenas that had sold out for his face grew quiet about him. The sponsors who had draped him in their colors found reasons to be elsewhere. Not because the palace lifted a finger against him. It never did, and that was the point. The king never needed to. Kessler was undone by the same crowd that had worshipped him, the moment they had a truer thing to compare him to, and the truer thing was a quiet gray guardsman who had spent 5 minutes refusing to hurt him. He did one thing, before the world closed over him, that I will give him credit for, because it was more than I expected. 3 days after the exhibition, a letter came to the company barracks, addressed to Corporal Halden Vale in a hard, cramped hand. The colonel gave it to Halden, and Halden read it standing at the window in the gray morning light, and then he folded it and put it in his tunic and said nothing about it, in the way he said nothing about most things. But I saw the letter later, because Halden, in a rare moment, showed it to me, so that you'll be fair to him, Tomas, when you tell this, as I know you will, and I will be fair to him because the letter deserves it. It was short. It said, I have spent my whole life being told I was the best, and I believed it, and I came to your house to prove it, and you showed me in 5 minutes that I had never once in my life met a man better than me until I met you. I struck you and lied about you, and you gave me my legs and my name back anyway, which I did not deserve and would not have done for you. I do not know how to be the man that clip showed you were, but I know now that he exists and that I am not him, and I think a man who learns that has been given something, even if it cost him everything he thought he was. Thank you for not breaking me. I will spend a while trying to understand why you didn't. Halden folded the letter back up. He's young, he said, which for Halden Vale was a whole speech of forgiveness. There may be a man in there yet. I've seen worse turn into better. And that was all he ever said about Dorian Kessler. But the story does not end with the champion, humbled or otherwise, because the champion was never really the point. The point was the quiet man, and what the kingdom, having discovered him, would do with him, and what he would do, having been discovered. Because the kingdom, having found Halden Vale, did not want to let him fold himself back up. That is the trouble with the loud world. Even its love is loud, and it does not know how to leave a quiet man quiet. Within the week there were offers, 100 of them, and they climbed. A stream of them came through the palace and the company both. Fighting promoters wanted him for exhibitions. They offered sums that made the clerks who read the letters go pale. Training academies wanted his name over their doors. A publisher wanted the story of the secret unit, seal or no seal. A film company wanted to make him a legend on 10,000 screens. Politicians wanted to stand beside him. The kingdom, having spent an afternoon watching a quiet man refuse to be anything other than what he was, now offered him every loud thing it had, and could not understand why he did not leap. He turned down all of it, every offer without exception, with the same short, courteous, immovable reply, which the colonel eventually had printed on a card to save the clerks the trouble. Colonel Vale is grateful for the honor and wishes to remain at his post. That was all. He wished to remain at his post. The king sent for him, once in those weeks. Privately, not to a gallery this time, but to a small warm room I never saw, where the colonel told me the two of them sat a long while, an old king and the man who had made his quietest soldiers, and spoke of things neither of them would ever repeat. What I know is only what Halden let slip months later on a cold night on the wall when the talk turned, as it sometimes did between the two of us now, to that afternoon. The king offered to unfold me, he said. A command, a rank restored. A monument near enough if I wanted it. He said the kingdom had seen what I was and would be glad to honor it. Halden was quiet a moment, his eyes forward on the dark. I told him the truth, Tomas, that the honor I wanted I already had. That I had spent the first half of my life reaching into the dark, and had been very good at it, too good, and that the second half I wanted to spend standing in the light at a gate, holding a rifle I would never fire, being no one at all. I told him that the day I fought that boy in the sand was the worst day I'd had in 6 years, not because I lost, I didn't lose, but because for 4 seconds I was the man I'd worked so hard to stop being, and I could feel how easy it would be to be him again, and that I never wanted to feel that again, and that the surest way to never feel it was to remain exactly what I'd become, a guardsman, a statue, a man who stands still. And the king, I asked. The king understood, Halden said. He is a wise man. He said that a crown is fortunate to have a servant who wants nothing from it, and that he would not take from me the one thing I asked for, which was to be left to my post. He shook my hand, not a bow, a handshake which meant more, and he said one thing more. Halden's weathered face was still, but not cold. There was something in it I had rarely seen, something that in another man I would have called peace. He said, "Then stand your gait, Colonel, and know that I sleep the sounder for it." And I thanked him, and I came back to the wall, and here I am. Here he was, here he is as I write this. Corporal Halden Vale to everyone who walks past the long gate, for he kept the corporal's tunic and the corporal's name, and the king let him keep them, because a man is allowed to choose his own smallness when he has earned the right to be large. The tourists who file past him now do not know what they are looking at. They see a middle-aged guardsman in a red coat and a tall fur hat, motionless, eyes forward, one of a dozen such men along the wall, indistinguishable to them from any other. Sometimes one of them, a young man full of himself, will lean in close and mock him, or wave a hand before his face, or try to make the statue break. And Halden gives them nothing, the way he gave Kessler nothing, and they laugh and film it and move on, never knowing how close they stood to the one thing in the whole kingdom their small provocation could never touch. And I stand beside him and I watch them not know, and I keep his secret, the way the colonel kept it, the way the king kept it, because it is his to give and not mine. There is one more thing, and I have saved it for last because it is the thing that stays with me most, more even than the king's handshake or the men who came home. It is the girl in the yellow coat. A month after the exhibition, a letter came to the company, not for Colonel Vale by his rank, which almost no letters used, but for the guard who wouldn't fight the bad man, which is how the small girl had described him to her mother when she dictated it. She was 7. Her name was Perdita. She had watched the whole afternoon from the rope line, and she had, her mother wrote, not been able to stop talking about it since. Not about the champion, whom she had already forgotten, but about the quiet man who let himself be knocked down 4 times so that he would not have to hurt somebody. That, the mother wrote, was the thing her daughter had taken from it. Not that the guard was strong. That the guard was kind, and that being kind had looked, to a watching child, exactly like being strong, that the two had turned out in the sand of the West Forecourt to be the same thing. She had asked her mother to write and say thank you, and to ask the guard one question which the mother set down word for word. Were you scared when he was being mean to you? Because I would have been. And you didn't run away or cry or hit him. How do you not run away? I gave the letter to Halden myself. He read it standing at the window, the way he read everything, and when he finished it he was quiet for a long time, longer than I had ever seen him quiet, and when he turned around his eyes were not entirely dry, which in 6 years I had never seen and never saw again. And Halden Vale, master of the crown's secret soldiers, holder of the Cross of Valor, the man who had put a champion on his back 4 times without a mark. Halden Vale sat down and wrote back to a 7-year-old girl in his careful hand, a letter I was permitted to read before he sealed it, and it said this: Dear Perdita, thank you for your letter, which is the finest one I have ever received, and I have received a good many. You asked how I do not run away. I will tell you the truth because you told me the truth. Yes, I was a little scared. Anyone would be. But I have learned a thing that I will give to you now because you are already halfway to knowing it. The bravest thing a strong person can do is choose to be gentle. Anyone can hit back. It takes no courage at all, and it is over in a moment, and it changes nothing. To stand still and hold your temper and refuse to become the cruel thing that is being cruel to you, that is the hard thing, and it is the thing worth doing, and you did it before I did that day when you said, "That's not nice," out loud in a crowd that was laughing. That took more courage than anything I did. You were the bravest person in the forecourt. Do not forget it. And when someone is unkind to you, as they will be, because the world is full of unkind people, remember that you do not have to become one of them to win. You only have to stand still and be who you are, and let them run out of unkindness because they always do, and you never will. Your friend, the guard. He sealed it and sent it, and he never spoke of it again, and I would not tell you now except that Halden gave me leave to tell this whole story, and the girl in the yellow coat is the best part of it. Because the men Halden saved in the dark, that was the old Halden, the one he laid down. But a letter to a small girl about how to be brave without becoming cruel, that was the new one, the guardsman, the statue, the man who stands still. And I think, if you asked him which of the 2 men he would rather be remembered as, he would choose the second without hesitating. He would rather be the guard who wouldn't fight the bad man than the master of any secret unit that ever served the crown. That is who he chose to become. That is who he is. But I have his leave at last to tell this one story, the day the champion came up the steps, and I have told it as truly as I can so that when you see the clip, the cut one, the fast one, the lie, you will know to watch it to the end. Watch the 4 falls that left no mark. Watch the hand that caught and did not strike. Watch the quiet man let a raging one fall softly into the sand, over and over, rather than break him, because there were children watching, and because mercy was the whole of what he had come out to demonstrate. And when it is over, when the loud man is on his back and the quiet man steps back one clean pace to parade rest and gives you nothing at all, understand what you saw. You did not see a martial artist take down a royal guard. You saw a royal guard decline 4 separate times to take down a martial artist, and then, when he had no choice, do it so gently that the man walked away whole. The impossible thing was never the reversal in the sand. Any master could have done the reversal. The impossible thing was the mercy. The impossible thing was a man of that much power choosing, again and again, in front of the whole watching world, to use almost none of it. That is the thing I have learned, standing 11 years on this wall beside a man I did not know was a colonel. The world is full of power, and power is cheap, and any fool can spend it. The rare thing, the impossible thing, the thing worth standing still your whole life to guard, is a man who has all the power in the world and holds it, and holds it, and holds it, and lets it go only to keep from doing harm. They call him a statue. They do not know that a statue is exactly the right word, not because he does not move, but because of what a statue is. A thing set up in the light so that men who pass will remember what a man can be. Halden Vale stands his gate, and I stand beside him, and I sleep as my king does, the sounder for it.